Oh, beautiful and meaningful that we're all together. My name is Jeff Berkowitz. I'm not saying anything in any official capacity. I was just asked to explain why I'm going to be blowing the shofar. So let me just set that. First, we're going to take all of us together 3 minutes right now, just to sort of move from the noise of the moment to a sense of reflection, to just be present, whatever that means. And then at 12:55, 12:56, I'm going to blow the shofar in 2 series. Some of you will know this is one of the most ancient musical instruments in the world, and Jewish people all over the world this week blow the shofar to celebrate Rosh Hashanah, the birth of the world. And at this moment, a lot of people don't really understand why we actually blow the shofar. Many Jewish people don't know why we blow it. But in fact, we blow it to wake up to the enormity of the moment, and with all due humility to think about what we can do to act and what we must do, not waiting for some divine intervention. And acting doesn't always mean making big speeches. Sometimes it means coming together and standing in a strong silence. And sometimes it means making sure that people whose voices are not heard get heard. And sometimes it means making some noise. And so at 1 o'clock, 1:01, we're going to make some noise in connection with and solidarity with people of faith and many faiths, people without faith, all over, to say that we are going to wake up and feel that we're going to do something, understanding that what we're really called to wake up to is to rededicate ourselves to work for social justice and to protecting creation, which we understand as the same work. And that's what the shofar blast will be. And if we time it right, the church bells will be in solidarity, so that particularly Jews, Christians, Muslims, Hindus, Buddhists, Baha'i, Taoists, people with no formal faith tradition, pagans, Wiccans, whomever, atheists, thank you, can feel that we come together with the genuine spirit of possibility to say, we're waking up, we're going to make some noise, and we will not be ignored. So just to help those who've just joined us understand what we're doing together, at 1 o'clock, we're going to participate together in the 350-second global sound-off, with the sense that people all over the world at the same moment are engaged in the same intention. And then we're going to march around the block. We're going to go together from Cayuga to Buffalo to Tioga and Court.
Now you have my schedule.
All right.
Gonna make this Morgan road. Gonna make this Houston road.
the ground, inch by inch, row by row. Please bless the seed, thy soul.
Well, about justice.
It is?
Nice work, nice work.
Oh yes, it's Thursday. Yep, they're doing. We've got the whole world in our hands.
Yeah, they showed a picture of it.
That's one delicate speck.
Yeah.
This way. This way.
But I'm so glad that so many people felt that they wanted to connect with people all over the world. And the reason we're all inside now is because we wanted this to be a kickoff event, not a one-off event. So, hooray for the whole world round. There are events like ours going on in at least 1,500 places around the world, in addition to the hundreds of thousands of people in New York City. I would, first of all, like to take this opportunity to thank the First Presbyterian Church, which has provided two wonderful things to us. So now Brad is going to, Brad McFall from JPIC is going to give a tribute to somebody who's been an inspiration to many, many, many of us who are concerned about about climate justice and its predecessor, eco-justice.
Many of you might have heard of the name Bill Gibson. I don't know how many people out here have heard of his name. Raise your hand if you've heard of Bill. Friends of Bill in the Presbyterian Church, often it's called. But we're here specifically on a specific topic, though, that's climate justice, right? The atmosphere and the outside air. But climate justice is one aspect of this larger notion, actually, if he didn't dub it, he was part of a group of people that were involved that called it eco-justice. There might even be people in here in the audience that were back in those formative years in the early 80s, some of the late 70s. So eco-justice, it's a journey, and it began in the last several decades of the 20th century, and it came about through a confluence of two different streams, more or less. One were social justice advances that we were seeing throughout the country, not only in the workplace, but also in communities, but also through the environmental movement actions that appeared and began to increase in the 70s. So both of those two sort of threads came together to form this braid of eco-justice. And so it is both the journey itself and that to which it aims. And it continues today, of course, with a new impetus. It has louder wake-up calls. I mean, this is probably one of them that we're experiencing. And there's ever-increasing evidence that really, 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 our future is here if we just stay the course that was begun these few decades before. It was a broad secular, environmental, and faith-based movement that Bill activated here locally with a campus eco-justice network that reached out not only to the faith-based communities but also to the secular world. And it was his vision to even though he's coming from a faith perspective, to really find a common ground that everybody can hold on to.
Okay, the next person I introduce to you is one of the people who has had my back through this whole thing and who we're We were involved in freeze campaign stuff in the 80s, and I'm just so thrilled to have Peg Unsworth back in Ithaca working with us on this. And Peg is friends with Barbara Lifton, and so she is going to introduce us to Barbara's statement that Barbara wrote for us today. And, but I'm going to give, take it away, Peg.
Hi. Good to see so many old friends. I don't know all your names, but I see. Barbara, as you probably guessed, is in New York City. She is our New York State Assemblywoman. And some of you remember when she worked with Marty Lester. Certainly I do. She sent the following statement, which we found so moving that we're asking you to join us in reading it. Margaret has a regimen for this. People on this side of the room are Group A, and we'll read the first sentence with Margaret. And then people on this side of the room are Group B, and we'll read with Brad. And then we will continue to alternate. Okay? Thanks.
We are at a critical time in confronting climate change, with increasingly serious warnings coming from the International Panel on Climate Change and the United States National Climate Assessment.
Scientists tell us that the next decade is our last chance to stop the worst in climate change. So I have come to join with other legislators in New York City to make our and your voices heard amongst the tens of thousands who understand this threat and demand political action.
We will not stand on the sidelines and allow the earth to be polluted.
We will not allow wealthy interests to deny the truth, to drastically alter the balance that countless species and the well-being of humanity depends on.
Continuing to dump greenhouse gases without conscience is the act of extreme corporations who must not be allowed to put their personal interests over those of our own.
Organizing, acting, and protesting for the good of every living thing on earth is not an extreme measure, and I thank you for joining with me and all of us in this endeavor today.
How's that for speaking truth to power and coming from a politician? But any of you who know Barbara are not surprised, but please do thank her. Okay. I'm Margaret McCaslin, and I'm a member of the branch of Quakers that doesn't have preachers. We're called unprogrammed. So I'm not going to preach. But if this were a sermon, if it were, it would have the title Beyond the Choir, because that is the main challenge we are putting before you today. How do we start having conversations about preventing further climate change, because it's already whacking us, outside the so-called environmental choir, communicating respectfully with enough people on every level, from our homes, our workplaces, our local governments, to our state and federal governments, and of course globally, which is the reason we're meeting at the same time as over 1,500 groups around the world and however many tens or hundreds of thousands of people in New York City who are addressing the UN discussion of climate change in the next few days. How do we create a tipping point of political will so that enough policies and practices change to actually create a safer planet? How do we network fast enough to make changes on the scale needed soon enough? One of the biggest challenges I see is to move responses to climate change beyond a growing interest in solar electricity, to talk about how deeply our economic system is embedded in unecological energy sources. Many of our politicians and policymakers, including ones locally who say a lot of good things, still assume we have a zero-sum situation, that policy either benefits ecosystems or it benefits local economies, but you can only promote one at the expense of the other. But I am hopeful things are changing. Many people are waking up and asking what they can do, and this event is a great example.
So,
I'm Linda Levine. I'm on the Dryden Town Board, and as Margaret said, I ran simply because of this issue of fracking, and I live in Dryden. So what I think is most impressive about us in Tompkins County is how close we are to the sources of information, and how many skills we each have. So I came up with this line that I really liked at some point, which was in talking about our victory at the appellate court level, so the highest level in New York State, which officially changed New York State law, the entire New York State law, when the Dryden case was litigated at that level. And that was that we had the best legal minds that money could not buy. And Helen and David Slutchy went on, sort of together, but at least Helen officially, to win the Goldman Award, which is sort of the environmental Nobel Prize, along with people from 5 other continents who risked their lives to save the rainforest in Indonesia, the Peruvian rainforest, at great risk to their personal lives. And we're really lucky. We usually don't have to risk our lives to do the right thing here. And I joked with Helen that, compared to these other people, one of them got exiled from his homeland and had to move to the next country over. So we are very fortunate. We do have wonderful things in America that allow us to take a stand. Maybe we'll end up in jail, but oh well, Sandra Steinbrecher has taught us that that's not such a terrible thing. And then there was Martin Luther King and a few other people who set an example that way. But usually, there's so many things we can do with so many skills that we have, not just great, best legal minds that, money can't buy, but we have writing skills, we have graphic skills, and speaking and teaching, and all of the kinds of skills that people need, cinematography, photography. Now, whatever it is that you do, it can make a big difference. And I think that's what we learned in Dryden, that in the midst of winter, we started with just people going door to door or online, making phone calls, getting people to sign a petition, and even in what looked like a difficult to access place, because it's so spread out, even though there's a fair amount of conservative base, it turned out that everybody in Dryden wanted to sign that petition. Well, not everybody, but an overwhelming majority. And it didn't matter whether they were Republicans or Democrats or liberals or independents or anything else. People cared about this environment. That's why we live here. And we need to protect it. And we can. And each of us has a skill to do that.
The next person who's going to speak is the Town of Ithaca Supervisor, Herb Ingman.
So let me just give you a few examples of what's going on locally, and we can talk a little bit more about them. Several of the governments in Tompkins County, the city, the county, and the Town of Ithaca, all have government climate action plans. And the smaller municipalities have a great deal of difficulty coming up with the resources to develop those plans. You have to establish your carbon footprints and then set your goals of carbon reduction, by 2020 or 2050. And that's not an easy process, believe it or not. And I started going to a lot of the local meetings on climate change, and when I found out the town of Ithaca didn't have those resources either. We're the biggest town in Tompkins County, but still we didn't have the resources. So the wonderful Park Foundation responded very positively to a suggestion I made to them that the town of Dryden and town of Ithaca jointly have a sustainability planner. And then that planner developed for us our government climate action plans. And we are now moving to the next step of that process, which is a community energy action plan. And that's just being developed right now by our current sustainability coordinator, Nick Goldsmith. So if you know Nick, he's doing wonderful work, and if you'd like to have input into that community energy action plan that we're developing, we'd be glad to have you participate. Now, when we think about saving energy, we often don't think of what's causing all of our usage of energy. in the town of Ithaca, what causes most of our energy usage are pumps. We're pumping water, we're pumping sewer, we're pumping stuff from one place to another. Remember, we're a town of hills, East Hill, South Hill, West Hill, and we're pumping stuff all over the place. And we're starting to replace those pumps in order to get better energy efficient pumps. And that's one of the first steps. One of the big things we're doing with the city of Ithaca is we have at the Ithaca Area Wastewater Treatment Plant a program it's about $9 million worth of improvements. And we have an agreement with Johnson Controls that they put it all in. If they do not give us savings over the life of the bonds, the $9 million worth, they have to pay us the difference. In other words, energy improvements will pay for that entire investment. And that's the sort of creative thinking, the creative programs that we need to get going in a lot of our systems in order to change over to more energy efficiency. One of the most important things I think we've done in the town of Ithaca, and the city of Ithaca is working on it now, and many of the other towns, we've created a new comprehensive plan. And the comprehensive plan deals with a lot of things, but including land use. And land use is what really influences energy use. For example, in our new plan, we've identified a couple growth areas in the town. We want those growth areas to be as close as we can get them to the city. The reason for that is then there's a better chance of mass transit, there's a better chance of people biking to work, walking to work. We want people to live, work, play, shop close to where they live. That eliminates a lot of the traffic, that eliminates a lot of the energy use. And that's something we can continue to work on. Trails, sidewalks, cycling, we need to provide the infrastructure for that so that people don't have to drive every single time they walk out the door to go to get something or to go to work.
Right now, I'm going to open it up to the floor and see if there are questions that you have, either for politicians or for some of the organizations.
I have done research on our current congressman, and it's relevant to this particular gathering today. Tom Reed has voted at least 3 times to prohibit the use of federal funds to monitor global warming.
So how many of you are familiar with community net metering? So this is like a win-win, and very few people are familiar with it. It allows groups of individuals, houses, small businesses within a limited geographic area, within a mile or 2 of each other, to get together to build their own, whatever form of energy generation you want to build. It can be solar, it can be wind, I suppose it can be a turbine, gasoline turbine plant, whatever it is. But what it does is it, one, reduces unemployment by 1 to 1.5%. It makes it much less expensive to build your solar array or whatever that is. It lets you get a better aggregate rate, because if you're doing it with me and you use a lot of energy at 7 in the morning, but I use it at 7 at night, our net effect is a benefit. It's like about half the states allow community net metering, and New York is not one of them. The bill that we're supporting right now models the one in Massachusetts, because much of upstate New York is provided with energy by the same parent company that provides much of the energy in Massachusetts. But there are something north of 24 bills that are now have been put in by different members of the Assembly, and my best guess is that community net metering hasn't passed because people don't know what it is, and because legislators are sort of afraid of what they don't know about. So if you would please look into community net metering. You've talked about elected officials in this community, encourage them to look at it and support it, since it creates jobs and it's green.
That bill is being kept in the closet by those big energy companies and their friends. And we need to have a lot more sunlight in Albany so that legislation comes from people elected by the citizens of New York and is not written by the fossil fuel industry giants. Right now in New York State, there are people working to make sure that the grid we get is not only resilient for all the extreme weather we're having, but that the energy is owned locally and that it's truly ecological. There's wrong scale hydro and right scale hydro. There's wrong scale solar and right scale solar. And the more the energy is generated locally, the more the costs are low, both the direct cost to the consumers and the cost to the environment.
How is it the Tompkins County area development, which maybe maybe Herb or somebody in government can explain, what are they, a quasi-private, public entity? But how is it that they are involved in setting basically policy for our energy future?
The county is redoing its comprehensive plan, and we are trying to embed core values and figure out, what is it that we really care about. Something I care a whole lot about is, for example, the quality of jobs. It's not just enough to have jobs in our county, but we want jobs that can provide a decent living for people who do them, and also jobs that help our community and the environment.
The mayor had campaigned on an anti-fracking platform. I have seen the city do virtually nothing. I've been single-handedly going to common council talking about what is the city going to do. And the city basic council said we're not going to spend time on it.
But I'd like to give Mike Lane, who is the county representative from Dryden and also the current chair of the County Board of Legislature, a chance to speak for a minute or two.
Thanks, Margaret. I'm pleased to be here at your invitation, and I'm glad to hear everything that we've been said here. And Faye, there is hope. And it's hope for all of us that things can change for the climate, for the better. It will happen because of small groups like this. It will happen because of big groups in New York City and in Washington and around the world, because they will get the attention of the people that have the power and know that there's a need to change. And we need to change, particularly at the state legislature. And we need to think about what's going to happen there. I'm very proud to be from Dryden, where the fracking issue first coalesced. And you've heard Linda Levine, the town board, talk about that. And we won a victory with the Court of Appeals case that said that the town land use law was superior to what the fracking companies wanted to do. But be ever so careful to understand it takes only a minute, maybe 1 minute to midnight, for the state legislature to do away with all of that by changing the law. And if we aren't vigilant, that's what will happen.
You can sign up to join Sustainable Tompkins mailing list, and also there's a sign up over there if you want to be notified when we have our next climate justice events. So thank you all very much.